Welcome, everybody, to another episode here with another history lesson. Today, we're going to delve deep into a term that has fascinated me, and we're going to find out the historical reasons behind this particular term. The term is jihad. So, we're going to delve deep into the Islamic tradition to that extent, and we're going to find out how this term has been changing throughout since the inception of the Muslim religion, and we're going to see how it's up to the interpretation of people on how they want to really address and the meaning that they put behind jihad. Because we might assume that in today's connotation in radical Islam, it might be perceived as a holy war. However, the term has way deeper meaning, and we're just going to find out. When we look at sacred texts, we know sacred texts guide millions worldwide, yet they're complex and they're open to interpretation, and their nature can lead to various sometimes conflicting beliefs based on the same passages. And in religious traditions like the Quran, the Bible, or the Torah, the use of language can be understood in various ways. And in many cases is shaped by the cultural, historical, and personal perspectives of the believers. And this flexibility allows individuals to justify beliefs or actions by finding supporting verses, a process often influenced by confirmation bias, where people look for information that aligns with their existing views in many cases. For example, while many interpret the Bible teachings as calls for compassion, others use specific passages to justify conflict. Similarly, Islam's concept of jihad is seen as a personal spiritual struggle, while others interpret it as a call for action in self-defense. This variability reflects not only the sacred texts, but also how individuals choose to interpret them. In this way, the reading of religious texts often mirrors the values, experiences, and sometimes political agendas of those interpreting them. Modern radical extremists interpret jihad primarily as a violent warfare against what they see as the enemy of Islam, significantly deviating from the term's traditional and broader meanings. So extremist groups reduce jihad to a literal holy war targeting non-believers or the infidels from secular governments or even like fellow Muslims that they deem insufficiently devout. They claim to fight against these groups. They claim religious justification for acts of violence, framing these actions as a divine mandate to establish a strict puritanical interpretation of Islamic rule. By manipulating religious texts, these groups justify terrorism and coercion to advance a political agenda that prioritizes power and control over spiritual or ethical aims. This modern extremist concept of jihad starkly contrasts with mainstream Islamic teachings, which uphold peace, justice, and compassion as core values. Now, recognizing this process helps us understand why jihad, like many religious concepts, has developed a range of meanings over time, mostly shaped by evolving perspectives of people and societies engaging with it. Approaching the concept of jihad is challenging due to its complexity and contemporary significance. Jihad is embedded in a rich tradition, a religion, and civilization with deep historical roots. While the existence of jihad in sacred texts gives it a fixed written form, its interpretation and applications have shifted significantly across the centuries. Though the texts remain constant, the meaning attributed to it has adapted in response to different social, cultural, and historical contexts. This phenomenon isn't surprising. For example, in Christian-majority countries, Christianity is often called the religion of love, yet History shows us that times people were persecuted or even burned at the stake in its name. This highlights a crucial distinction between religious texts and principles on the other hand, and the interpretation and implementations of those principles on the other. In each era, and often driven by varying motivations, societies shape their understanding of sacred teachings. This demonstrates the concepts like jihad evolve over time in their interpretation, reflecting the dynamic relationship between ancient texts and the changing context in which they are read. Now, jihad became especially prominent in the Middle Ages, around the 8th century, as Islam expanded into the territories of the Byzantine and Sassanid empires and beyond. During this period, the interpretations of jihad evolved, influenced by spiritual ideals and practical needs of an expanding Islamic world. Early Islamic teachings define jihad broadly as striving or struggling in the cause of God, covering both personal spiritual goals and physical defense of Muslim lands. In the Quran, that is the holy book of the Islamic religion, and foundational teaching, jihad held diverse meanings. There's this separation between this explanation, actually, between the greater jihad, al-jihad al-akbar, that is emphasized by an internal struggle to maintain religious practices. In contrast, the lesser jihad, al-jihad al-asghar, is, pardon my pronunciation from the Arabic, I'm not really familiar with that language, is referred to physical combat, especially in self-defense. Together, these aspects presented jihad as a balanced concept, encompassing both personal discipline and protection of the Muslim community. Muslim theologians have historically made the distinction between the greater jihad and the lesser jihad. The lesser jihad involves taking up arms to defend the faith, and many theologians suggest that this can be undertaken by anyone. In contrast, the greater jihad refers to a profound inner struggle, examining one's life and to ensure it aligns with God's will. This aspect is deeply connected to personal values, lifestyle choices, and moral integrity. This inner jihad is considered the truest and most significant form of jihad that every believer should strive for. Now, greater jihad is not a concept based solely on external conflict. It emphasizes the importance of cultivating spiritual growth and ethical living. By framing the term in this way, theologians provide a nuanced understanding that counters simplistic interpretations and commitment to self-improvement and moral values central to Islamic teachings. This approach shows that the essence of jihad lies in the pursuit of a righteous and fulfilling life, deeply rooted in faith and devotion. During the Middle Ages, particularly under the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties, jihad gained prominence as a military endeavor. As the Islamic Empire grew, military jihad became a means to justify expansion and rally the community. Jurists such as Imam al-Shafi and Ibn Taymiyyah provided detailed legal guidelines on warfare treatment of prisoners, interaction with non-Muslims, mirroring the political pressure and external threats that Muslims territories faced. Now, the arrival of the Crusaders in the Levant in the 11th century sharpened the focus on jihad as a defensive action. Leaders like Saladin involved jihad to unite Muslims against the Christian Crusaders, occupying the Holy Land, cementing jihad as a defensive unifying force to protect Islam from foreign threats. In parallel, Sufi scholars emphasize the spiritual dimension of jihad. Figures like Al-Ghazali and highlighted jihad as an internal moral effort, encouraging Muslims to cultivate spiritual discipline. The Sufi perspective of jihad as a personal journey coexisted with the more military interpretations, reflecting the diversity within the Islamic tradition. As a consequence, jihad became understood as both a personal struggle for moral integrity and, when necessary, as a means for defending the faith. The term jihad is often translated as holy war, but this interpretation is overly simplistic and misleading. In reality, jihad does not directly mean war. It more accurately translates to effort or striving. Within a religious context, it refers to the effort to live accordingly to God's will. In Islam, jihad represents a broad concept that encourages believers to seek out what God desires of them and to strive to fulfill those divine expectations, much like Christianity's calls for faith-driven action. Islam teaches its followers to actively align themselves with divine guidance. This expansive definition, essentially meaning strive to do what God asks of you, allows for various expressions of jihad influenced by individual or communal interpretations. However, when a faith community perceives a direct threat to their beliefs or well-being, the meaning of jihad can shift significantly. In such circumstances, the effort to please God might be interpreted by some as a justification for taking up arms in defense of their faith. This shows that jihad assumes a multifaceted nature, illustrating its versatility with complex interpretations across different contexts. Now, the translation of jihad as holy war often leads to comparisons with the Crusades, showing a complex relationship between Christianity and warfare. Christian thought involves a spectrum of views ranging from pacifism to the notion of just wars, with some conflicts historically regarded as holy. In Christian tradition, the concept of a just war is rooted in the principles that aim to define when it is morally acceptable to engage in warfare. This framework is known as just war theory, that has been developed and refined over centuries, particularly by theologians like St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. The theory provides criteria for both the right to go to war, as jus ad bellum, and the right to conduct within war, jus in bello. So today, the concept of a holy war is largely rejected, though certain wars may still be viewed as just under specific conditions. This can lead to comparisons between the Crusades, when Christians believed their wars were divinely sanctioned, and jihad, suggesting that these ideas are pretty much two sides of the same coin. However, this comparison oversimplifies both traditions. Jihad includes broader meanings, including spiritual struggle and personal growth, as we already mentioned earlier, while the Crusades were motivated by factors such as territorial expansion and political power. This distinction between theory and practice is critical when discussing jihad and the Crusades. While theoretical frameworks might articulate specific beliefs and doctrines, the realities on the ground often diverge significantly. For example, during the battles between Saladin and the Templars near the Sea of Galilee, both sides likely believed they were fighting for God's cause. The Templars thought they were drawing swords in God's service, while Saladin and his forces viewed their actions as similarly divinely sanctioned. In this collective mindset, both jihad and the Crusades can be seen as expressions of faith, with each side convinced of divine support. So Saladin, known in Arabic as Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, was a prominent Muslim military leader as the first Sultan of Egypt and Syria in the 12th century. He is best remembered in the Crusades, particularly for leading Muslim resistance against the Christian invaders. This shared perception of divine belief underscores the complex and often intertwined nature of religious motivations in both Islamic and Christian contexts during this period. Even after the Middle Ages, religious motivations for conflict continued to play a significant role. A notable example is the Battle of Lepanto in October 1571, where the Catholic and Ottoman fleets faced each other at dawn. Many of the Christian galleys believed they were fighting for their faith, while those in the Ottoman galleys were likely held similar convictions about their own beliefs. However, there are important distinctions between the Crusades and the concept of jihad, as understood in the Islamic tradition. When the Crusades began, Muslims did not perceive the Christian campaigns as a form of jihad. Instead, their primary response was to view the Crusaders as aggressive invaders seeking conquest, without recognizing any religious struggle on their part. This perspective shows how motivations and perceptions in a conflict can vary significantly across different cultures and historical contexts. A pivotal work that provides valuable insights into the historical accounts of the Crusades is the title of the book is Arab Historians of the Crusades. This book presents the Crusades through the perspectives of Arab historians, offering a counter-narrative to the Eurocentric views often prevalent in Western history. It features writings from prominent Muslim historians such as Ibn al-Athir, who critically assess the motivations and actions of the Crusaders, framing them as aggressive invasions rather than holy missions. By situating the Crusades within the broader historical and cultural context of the medieval Islamic world, the book discusses the political and social dynamics that shaped Muslim response to the Crusaders. Through its exploration of complex interaction between Christians and Muslims, including warfare, diplomacy, and cultural exchanges, the book highlights the enduring effects of the Crusades on Christian-Muslim relations and the historical memory in both cultures. So, for instance, Ibn al-Athir recounts the aggressive actions of the Franks in the Holy Land, beginning with an assembly called by King Baldwin of Boulogne, one of the leaders of the First Crusade. During this period, the Franks referred to themselves as such, particularly in Latin writings, and the clergy accompanying the First Crusade proclaimed the deeds accomplished by God through the hands of the Franks. This historical connection is illustrated in Ibn al-Athir's account of Baldwin of Boulogne, gathering a significant force for both conquest and establishing a presence along the North African coast. When King Roger II of Sicily received news of this impending army, he convened his advisors to discuss the implications. The advisors speculated that the arrival of the Franks might be beneficial, reasoning, "For the gospel, this could be good for us. This way, those lands will become Christian." This exchange shows the intentions of the Crusaders and the complex dynamics at play during the Crusades, showing that the interplay of religion, politics, and cultural identity in this historical context. However, Roger of Sicily expressed concerns about the Franks, stating, "We're friends with the Muslim king of Tunisia and will protest. He will protest if we let them pass." He suggested writing to Baldwin to caution him against waging war against the Muslims. Roger urged Baldwin to focus on conquering Jerusalem for glory rather than diverting efforts toward Africa, where existing oaths of agreements bound him to Muslim rulers. The situation reveals how the Crusades were driven more by political motivations and conquest than by purely religious reasons, with the original focus on Africa being redirected toward the Holy Land. The initial religious motivations for jihad did not resonate strongly with the Arab population until news of the invasion of Jerusalem by infidel barbarians reached them. This event sparked widespread outrage and mobilized public sentiment, compelling the authorities, including the Caliph in Baghdad, who held spiritual authority but had limited political power, and the Turkish Seljuk Sultan, who wielded military authority to respond. The influx of refugees fleeing from the Holy Land disrupted daily life in Baghdad, as legal scholars, merchants, and other citizens gathered in front of the Grand Mosque demanding that the authorities address the threat posed by the Crusaders. They famously pulled down the preacher and insisted, "There is only one thing we must discuss now, the aggression of the Franks." As a result, the concept of jihad, particularly in a defensive context, emerged, and a term that had remained somewhat dormant in Muslim culture for centuries. This marks a new distinction compared to the Christian Crusades, which arose at the end of the 11th century as an offensive push to liberate holy sites. The Muslim authorities were compelled to take action when they witnessed extraordinary scenes of people fleeing the Holy Land and the urgency of their demands. We need some clarifications, though. The interpretation of text, including those related to jihad, can be manipulated by individuals to fit their agendas. When I refer to jihad as a defensive concept, I do not mean to imply that it cannot be portrayed differently. For example, a modern radical figure in the Middle East today might justify violent acts such as sending someone to detonate a bomb in a shopping mall in the West by framing it as a defensive measure against an external attack. This highlights the complexity of the topic surrounding jihad. Theoretical discussions about its nature don't capture every meaning or every facet of its implication in reality. However, they do provide valuable insights for understanding the term. Historically, jihad has emerged and receded at various points, often resurfacing in response to specific circumstances. In examining passages from the Quran, we see that the concept of jihad is rooted in the context of Muhammad's mission to spread the worship of the one true God among the polytheistic tribes. When these tribes threatened his life, he faced critical decisions. Muhammad's approach diverged significantly from that of Jesus Christ, while Jesus ultimately chose non-resistance, allowing violence against himself to unfold without retaliation, only evidenced by his rebuke of Peter when he drew a sword. Muhammad opted for a different path. He believed that as a prophet appointed by God, he could not allow his mission to be extinguished by death. Thus, during his ministry, especially in the civil unrest between nomadic Bedouins and settled Arabs from 620 to 630, we're talking AC, he chose to engage in warfare when necessary to protect his community and faith. Islam began in the early 7th century after Christ in the Arabian Peninsula, specifically in Mecca, present-day Saudi Arabia. The religion's founding is marked by the first revelation received by the Prophet Muhammad in 610. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad was meditating in the cave of Hira near Mecca, where the angel Gabriel, Jibril in Arabic, appeared to him, conveying the first verses that would become the Quran, Islamic's holy book, as we know it today. These revelations continued for about 23 years until Muhammad's death in 632. Muhammad began preaching monotheism to people of Mecca, urging them to abandon polytheism and idolatry in favor of worshipping one true God, Allah, to that extent, as we know it today. His teachings faced resistance, and he and his early followers faced persecution in Mecca. In 622, Muhammad and his followers migrated to the city of Yathrib, later renamed as Medina, in an event known as the Hijra, or migration, marking the beginning of the Islamic calendar. In Medina, Muhammad established a growing Muslim community and a theocratic state, gaining followers and negotiating political alliances. By the time of his death in 632, Islam had spread across much of the Arabian Peninsula. Afterward, Muslim rulers called caliphs led the rapid expansion of Islam beyond Arabia, spreading the religion through a combination of conquest, trade, and missionary activity across the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. At the peak of their expansion into Europe in the early 8th century, the Arab and Berber forces under the Umayyad Caliphate controlled nearly the entire Iberian Peninsula, modern Spain, encompassing present-day Spain and Portugal, as well as parts of what is now southern France. The conquest began in 711 with the Battle of Guadalete, where the Umayyad forces defeated the Visigothic king Roderick. Over the following years, they advanced through much of the Iberian Peninsula, taking key cities as Toledo, Sevilla, and Cordoba. These early victories established the foundations of what would later become the religion of Al-Andalus, a unique Islamic civilization in Europe. Now, the term Al-Andalus is modern Andalusia, and in the Hispanic language, the Spanish language has been deeply influenced by the presence of the Arabian populations because they have been in Spain for about 8 centuries. So you see all the prefixes that in Spanish that start with al have been influenced by the Arabic language. You see terms like alcachofa or almohada, even the same term al-Andalus, Andalusia. And if you even go there in southern Spain, you can still see some Arabic architecture of the beautiful architecture, actually, of the Arabian culture. In addition to the Iberian Peninsula, the Umayyads expanded into Septimania, a region in the southern part of modern-day France. Between 720 and 759, this area, previously part of the Visigothic kingdom, included important locations such as Narbonne, which was captured in 720 and became a critical outpost for the Umayyad forces north of the Pyrenees. From Septimania, Muslim armies launched raids deeper into Frankish territory, challenging local rulers and taking advantage of political fragmentation among the Franks. From this stronghold, the Umayyad forces attempted further incursions into the Frankish territories, launching raids into regions such as Aquitaine and Burgundy. They reached notable towns and cities, including Bordeaux and Autun, and as they pushed northward. However, the farthest significant advancement came in 732, when an army led by the Umayyad governor Abd al-Rahman and al-Ghafiqi moved towards Tours in western France. This incursion led to the famous Battle of Tours, also known as the Battle of Poitiers, where the Umayyad forces faced a decisive defeat by the Frankish leader Charles Martel. This battle marked a critical turning point that effectively ended the Umayyad expansion into Western Europe. Following the Battle of Tours, the Umayyads shifted their focus back to consolidating their holdings in the Iberian Peninsula in Spain, rather than pursuing further advances into Frankish lands. Cordoba eventually became the capital of Al-Andalus, serving as a center for Islamic culture and governance. Although small-scale raids would occasionally occur across the Pyrenees, the battle outcome created a relatively stable frontier that lasted for centuries, defining the northern limits of the Muslim expansion into Europe. After their expansive conquest, the Arabs experienced a long period during which they felt like the dominant power in the world. After major conquests, they converted larger regions to Islam and felt secure for centuries, leading to a decline in discussions about jihad. This conversation reignited in 1096 with the arrival of the Crusaders in Asia Minor and their conquest of Jerusalem in 1099. The concept of jihad reemerged in response to this challenge, much like the enduring notion of crusades in the Christian world. As historians often conclude, discussions of the Crusades around 1291 when Muslims regained the last Frankish stronghold in Acre. It's essential to recognize that the spirit of the crusade persisted long after, because there wasn't just only one crusade, there were multiple ones. Some even say a fourth crusade, or a fifth, if I'm not mistaken. Although trade negotiations and treaties occurred, both sides maintained an adversarial mindset, viewing each other with suspicion. In the Muslim world, the concept of jihad was periodically invoked to inspire fighters, but as the Islamic world transitioned to a position of offense, particularly with the rise of the Ottoman Empire, its prominence declined. The Ottomans expanded to the gates of Vienna, that would occasionally called the ulema, a term that refers to Islamic scholars, jurists, and religious authorities who are highly knowledgeable in Islamic theology, law, and jurisprudence. So the Ottomans called on the ulema to discuss jihad as a form of propaganda to rally support in conflicts against Christian powers. However, between the 16th and 18th century, jihad was not a significant theme in Islamic culture. By the 19th century, it held even less importance in the broader societal context. In the 19th century, as European powers intensified colonial pursuits in Muslim-majority regions, Muslim intellectuals began to revive discussions around jihad and the Crusades. With historical invasions as a reference, they argued that Western invasion of Muslim lands was reminiscent to past Crusades. Figures like Saladin, who successfully resisted previous invasions, were invoked as powerful symbols of resistance against foreign aggressions, stirring a renewed sense of unity and defense against external pressures. Now, colonialism had a major impact on how people in Muslim-majority countries view Western nations. Intellectuals often describe colonial actions like the French rule in Algeria and the British control in North Africa, Egypt, and the Middle East as part of a long history of foreign invasions and occupation. They portrayed Western powers as continuing a pattern of aggression against their regions. This context has led to the periodic resurgence of the concept of jihad in both political and cultural spheres, particularly during times of perceived aggression. For instance, during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, here we are in the 20th century. In the 1980s, the call for jihad gained significant support, framing resistance as both a spiritual obligation and a nationalist duty. This modern interpretation of jihad highlights how the concept has evolved over time, responding to foreign interventions and serving as a symbol of self-determination in the face of both historical and ongoing struggles. As we know it, the Mujahidin, a collective group of Afghan fighters, played a crucial role in resisting the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. Their name, meaning those who engage in jihad, signified their dedication to defending the interpretation of Islam and their homeland. The Soviet invasion began in December 1979, aiming to support a struggling communist government in Afghanistan, but it faced fierce resistance from the Mujahidin, who united diverse groups under the shared goal of opposing foreign interventions. Despite this unified front, the Mujahideen were not a single cohesive force. They consisted of various factions, each with its own ideologies, goals, and leadership structures. This diversity led to varied strategies and approaches to the conflict, reflecting the fighters' different beliefs and motivations. Ideological differences within the coalition of Islamic groups often caused tensions and rivalries, complicating the collective resistance against the Soviets. Viewing the Soviet invasion as a threat to the region, the United States provided financial and military aid to the Mujahideen through the CIA's Operation Cyclone. The support included arms, training, and funding channeled primarily through Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, which facilitated the distribution of resources. Other Islamic nations, notably Saudi Arabia and Egypt, also offered financial backing motivated by the desire to counter Soviet influence and boost Islamic movements. The Mujahidin guerrilla tactics, combined with their international support, pressured the Soviet Union to withdraw in 1989, marking a significant Cold War milestone that weakened Soviet influence in the region. Although the United States did not directly engage in the conflict, its support for the Mujahideen had profound and lasting consequences for Afghanistan and the geopolitical landscape following the Soviet exit. Afghanistan plunged into civil war, leading to the rise of the Taliban in the 1990s. The US withdrew its focus from Afghanistan, allowing factions to evolve in ways that would later have substantial impacts, with the emergence of Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups, radical groups. Even after their success against the Soviets, victory did not translate into a peaceful or stable Afghanistan, setting the stage for more conflict and unrest. During the 1980s, the Mujahideen enjoyed widespread support in the West, celebrated as freedom fighters against Soviet occupations. However, following the Soviet withdrawal, the dynamics shifted. When US forces entered Afghanistan decades later, many former Mujahideen members continued their resistance. Now targeting American troops, Western media interest faded, yet the fighters' motivations remained rooted in a similar narrative, defending their homeland against foreign occupation. The Mujahideen leaders framed their actions within the Quranic context of defensive jihad, emphasizing the belief that resistance against foreign powers was not only a national duty but also a religious obligation. Understanding the concept of jihad and its interpretations requires explaining not only the linguistic and historical layers of the Quran, but also the nuanced ways of different communities approaching its meaning. The Quran was written in the 7th century, using poetic and classical Arabic, which adds depth to its language, but also poses challenges for modern interpretation. Without a single authority, though, such as a pope or a centralized clergy, Islamic interpretation relies on diverse scholars and teachers who, through deep study, share insights on Quranic teachings. This flexibility allows for wide-ranging understanding, but also means that there is no universally accepted interpretations. The four historical Sunni schools of Islamic jurisprudence, the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, and Hanbali, each offer distinct interpretative approaches, especially on concepts like jihad. While these schools provide structured interpretations, the Islamic tradition allows for the emergence of new interpretations or schools, leading to a dynamic spectrum of viewpoints on concepts including jihad. The term jihad itself encompasses multiple layers of meaning. As we already mentioned a few times, it broadly denotes an effort of struggle, but also includes the idea of striving in the way of God. This phrase, which is often seen as encompassing spiritual, personal, and communal efforts, does have contexts in which it refers specifically to armed defense, especially when the faith of the community perceives itself to be under existential threat. In addressing military action or self-defense, the Quran discusses instances when fighting is permitted without necessarily using the term jihad. In the second surah of the Quran, known as the Surah Al-Baqarah, or the cow, contains the phrase jihad fi sabilillah, meaning jihad in the way of God, within a context related to fighting. The surah elaborates on the condition under which fighting is sanctioned, providing a nuanced discourse on the circumstances that justify it. The reasoning within the surah reveals complexities in interpretations, similar to those found in the Bible. For instance, it states, "Fight in the way of God against those who make war against you," establishing self-defense as a core principle, while another verse emphasizes restraint with the assertion, "Do not exceed, for God does not love those who exceed." This verse emphasizes defensive action and the importance of restraint against excess or aggression. The emphasis is on defensive action and the restraint against excess or aggression, a theme that is further clarified in verses that speak to the protection of the community and freedom to worship. Many Islamic traditions emphasize jihad against oppression and the pursuit of self-improvement as essential components of religious life. In this view, physical struggle is regarded as the last resort, only permissible under strict conditions. The complexity of jihad lies not only in its textual origins, but also in its applications across various historical and social contexts. This complexity makes interpretation both challenging and essential as different communities and leaders may understand and teach these principles in unique ways, shaping distinct paths to practice within the broader Islamic tradition. In Islamic theology, the Quran is considered a direct manifestation of God's will, making these words central to understanding the divine stance of self-defense. Historians note that Muhammad emphasized these ideas through his life, and they were compiled into the written Quran after his passing. The Prophet recognized that those who converted to Islam often faced persecution and expulsion, and he asserted their right to defend themselves in response. It's noteworthy that he viewed this faith as stemming from the same God worshipped in Judaism and Christianity. His primary adversaries were not Jews or Christians, but polytheistic tribes who opposed this call to monotheism. In fact, Muhammad established alliances with various groups, including Arab Christians and, to some extent, Arab Jews. Historians state that Muhammad's messages were initially directed to the polytheistic Arabs in 627, yet these messages evolved into foundational teachings for a religion that has endured for millennia. As a consequence, each generation of Muslims interprets these teachings in ways that reflect their unique circumstances and belief. The Quran has been accompanied by centuries of commentary from scholars who have explored the implications of its guidance. Since the Middle Ages, Islamic scholars have debated the meaning of exceed in the context of conflict. The prevailing view has been that excessiveness, as we've seen in the previous surah, God does not like those who exceed, such as the excessiveness, such as in torturing enemies, mistreating prisoners, or destroying property without cause, that appears to be prohibited. Many scholars argue that the Quran admonition to not exceed implies a duty to protect women, children, and non-combatants from harm. The text calls for fighting against those who wage war on you, explicitly stating that you must kill them wherever you find them and drive them out from where they've driven you. This verse holds significant historical importance as illustrates the renewed urgency of Muhammad's preaching when Jerusalem fell in the hands of the Crusaders. Once the true faith has been established in a territory, it is considered a disgrace for believers to allow it to be removed. This belief that a piece of land has become Islamic compels Muslims to resist its reclamation by others, like a lost territory. This is really important to them. Such a sense of ownership over territory where Islam has taken root can serve as a powerful motivator. This echoes sentiments that have persisted through the ages. These feelings were especially prominent in the Middle Ages and continue to influence perceptions today, where civil discord is often viewed as worse than outright violence. Civil discord refers to conflict or disagreement with a community, which can lead to a breakdown in social order and unity. This concept becomes significant when discussing interpretations of sacred texts, as different translations can present various nuances. For instance, civil discord is worse than slaughter appears in the Quran, but some translations interpret it as persecution is stronger than slaughter, or subversion is more serious than killing. This discrepancy illustrates how translation often hinges on subjective interpretation, highlighting the complexities involved in understanding sacred texts. To fully grasp the implication of this verse, it is essential to examine the Arabic word fitna, which encompasses a broad semantic spectrum. So in Arabic, fitna can refer to subversion, seduction, discord, sedition, insurrection, civil war, conflict, intrigue, conspiracy, disbelief, trial, temptation, demonic obsession, and slander. These varied meanings reflect the idea that all actions who cause division within a community are detrimental, originating from Satan, who is referred to as Al-Fatin, the tempter. The consonantal roots of these words consonantal, yes, that is the correct term, reveal a deep connection between discord and temptation in the Islamic mindset. In this context, the Prophet's teaching emphasized the importance of unity among believers. However, this call for unity must be understood in light of Muhammad's mission to introduce the new faith to polytheistic Arabs. In Islamic tradition, polytheism is viewed as offensive to God and is considered something that must be eradicated. While the Quran does not explicitly state that Christians and Jews are to be considered enemies of the true faith, some scholars have interpreted certain verses as implying that they should be fought until they convert to Islam. It is crucial to note, however, that authoritative scholars who explicitly endorse this viewpoint are rare, even if they may seem common. Actually, in reality, according to some of the modern thoughts or schools of thoughts, many interpretations suggest that Christians and Jews should not be aggressive or assume the right to dictate the actions of Muslims. Historically, Christians and Jews who recognized the supremacy of Islamic authority were not necessarily compelled to convert. Islamic empires often prioritized stability and governance over the mass conversions of non-Muslims, reflecting a pragmatic approach to rule. This complexity illustrates how sacred texts can be interpreted in various ways, leading to a wide range of beliefs and practices within the Islamic tradition. Ultimately, the ambiguity in these interpretations highlights the intricate relationships between scripture and its application in both historical and contemporary contexts. The Quran includes the directive to fight it, emphasizing that civil discord is considered worse than slaughter. However, it also contains an important caveat. Fighting is not permitted near the sacred mosque. This principle seems to be overlooked today, as mosques are sometimes destroyed without regard to their sanctity, particularly in conflicts between the two groups, Shiites and Sunnis. Nevertheless, the text clarifies that if someone is attacked near the mosque, they are allowed to defend themselves and retaliate, as such actions are seen as justified against disbelievers. Importantly, the Quran also states that if the aggressor ceases their hostilities, meaning they lower their arms, then God is forgiving and compassionate. The message is clear: fight against civil discord and ensure that religion is practiced solely for God. Once aggression stops, further hostility should be directed only toward the wicked. This framework provides a theological basis for the historical coexistence of Christians and Jews within the medieval Arab Empire and the modern Ottoman Empire. These communities were permitted to practice their religions peacefully as second-class citizens, as long as they did not exhibit hostility. The Quran teaching suggests that those who refrain from aggression should not be fought against. A significant question arises: is jihad, or the act of taking up arms when absolutely necessary, an obligation for a believer? Interpretations of these issues vary widely today. Traditionally, jihad has not been classified as one of the fundamental obligations of a Muslim, but this does not prevent individuals from asserting that they believe it to be obligatory. The complexity of this topic is acknowledged in the Quran itself, particularly in Surah 47, which suggests that believers are questioning whether war is mandatory. In this context, God notes that if a specific surah had been revealed to make war necessary, the weaker among the believers might have been overwhelmed by the demand. Therefore, God refrains from labeling war as an obligation, instead leaving it to the believer's conscience to determine if the circumstances need fighting. This nuanced approach allows for a range of interpretations regarding the necessities of jihad in various situations. The Quran contains relatively few passages that explicitly discuss war. One significant passage appears again in the second surah of the Cow, which addresses the concept of jihad, fight in the way of God, and know that God hears and knows everything. However, the Quran acknowledges that this command alone, fight in the way of God, is not enough. It emphasizes the importance of convincing believers that fighting is warranted only in specific circumstances. The Quran addresses the circumstances under which fighting might be justified by referencing a biblical story about the Israelites after Moses' death. In this story, the Israelites ask a prophet for a king to lead them, promising to fight in God's cause. The prophet cautions them that if they are commanded to fight, they must follow through. They confirm their commitment, saying, "How could we not fight in the way of God when we are being driven from our homes and our children?" Yet when the time to fight arrives, many turn away, leaving only a few steadfast individuals. This account emphasizes that while fighting may sometimes be necessary, commitment to a just cause often requires a broader understanding of dedication and resilience beyond physical battle. The narrative continues with the prophet Samuel appointing Saul as king to lead the Israelites against their enemies, the Philistines, where they eventually face the warrior Goliath. David, a young but courageous figure, defeats Goliath and later becomes a revered king. Although the Quran simplifies the story, it uses it to show that commitment to God's cause involves more than just warfare. It is also about moral courage and the willingness to overcome personal and spiritual challenges. In the original biblical account, the elders of Israel asked Samuel for a king, saying, "You're old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Appoint for us a king to govern us, like all the other nations." Samuel hesitates, seeing this as a rejection of divine leadership, but God instructs him to grant their request. Saul is appointed, though he ultimately struggles in this role. The Quran's adaptations of the story conveys that the concept of jihad, often misrepresented solely as warfare, embodies a broader struggle, including personal and spiritual dedication to God's guidance. Muhammad drew selectively from the story, focusing on themes relevant to his message, such as resilience, faith, and moral courage. Through this story, the Quran invites readers to consider that fighting in God's cause does not always mean literal battle. It can also involve inner struggles and efforts toward justice, discipline, and peace. Ultimately, jihad is a term rooted in personal and communal striving for moral, spiritual, and societal betterment, encompassing struggles from personal self-improvement to defending the community against oppression. However, in the modern context, this term has been co-opted by extremist factions, using a narrow interpretation to justify actions that contradict the core ethical teachings of Islam. That's teachings that emphasize mercy, justice, and the sanctity of life. Historically, during the Islamic Golden Age, roughly from the 8th to the 14th century, Muslims made remarkable advancements in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Scholars like Al-Khwarizmi, I really don't know how to pronounce his name. Let me try again. Al-Khwarizmi, and Avicenna. These are very important scholars. I don't want to mess up their name. They led this intellectual flourishing, translating and building upon the works of various cultures and fostering an environment that encouraged inquiry and innovation. However, Over time, factors such as political fragmentation, invasions, and social challenges contributed to a decline in scientific inquiry and educational pursuits in many Muslim societies. In some instances, this decline coincided with the rise of conservative and fundamentalist interpretations of Islam, which often prioritizes dogma over critical thinking and intellectual engagement. These extremist ideologies have emerged from social and political grievances, promoting a narrow view of jihad that dismisses the importance of science and reason. To counter this, there is a growing movement among contemporary Muslim scholars and activists who seek to re-emphasize the original meanings of jihad as a commitment to justice, ethical conduct, and community welfare. By advocating for a synthesis of faith and reason, they aim to revitalize the rich intellectual heritage of the Islamic Golden Age, demonstrating that true jihad involves the pursuit of knowledge and the promotion of peace. In doing so, they challenge the partisan and violent agendas espoused by some today, reminding us that the essence of jihad is aligned with the principles of compassion, understanding, and the greater good. Well, this is all for today, folks. Thank you for sticking around if you made it this far. As always, subscribe, share if you like it, and I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.